Well, welcome everyone. I hope you guys had a great week. I know things are getting probably busier for many of you as we prepare for the season. As we begin together, if you have your Bibles, if you can turn with me to Matthew chapter 5. We're continuing on the Kingdom of God series. So Matthew chapter 5. At verse 21 to 26. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 to 26. All right, Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 to 26. Again, I'll read the first verse. You'll read the second. We'll just keep going back and forth. I'll be reading from the NIV. If you don't have NIV, you can read it off the screen. It reads this. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.
But I tell you that anyone who is angry with the sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka is sorry, Mr.
Is it not? Okay. I'll help you guys. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. I know it seems like it's a very heavy passage for Christmas and our Sunday before Christmas. But as you guys all know, the original Christmas setting, or when Christ came, it was a setting that was very dark. It was a setting where it wasn't what we celebrate today, but a very dark place, dark times, and difficult political situations. And so in terms of this Christmas passage that we're reading through, it may not feel like it aligns with the kind of cultural Christmas that we're kind of used to, but this really was the setting and the reason why Christ came into the world. See, we didn't practice this for this year, but there's this thing called these Advent candles. And most people believe in history that these Advent candles were created, or this tradition was created in the 3rd or the 4th century, where candles were lit, where every Sunday before Christmas, as they were lit, it was supposed to represent a light or a particular aspect of light in darkness. So even in the 3rd and 4th century, as some Christians were experiencing difficulty and they really wanted to experience some sort of joy, some sort of hope, some sort of filling in their life, that first candle that was lit, it was supposed to represent hope. And so when that candle is lit, for those who are experiencing darkness in their hearts, in the world around them, and they were losing hope for any saving, losing hope for any future, that candle was lit to represent that Christ is our light in our darkness, and in particular, He is your hope. The second Sunday where the candle was lit was supposed to be faith, because we all know that when we're going through difficult circumstances, our faith begins to wane. And as our faith wanes, we begin to start thinking about, maybe this isn't true, maybe this isn't real, maybe God doesn't make the difference, maybe all of this really is just made up by man, maybe God doesn't care about me. And so for those of people who are experiencing hardship in maintaining their faith, their trust in God, and because they were losing faith, they stopped going to God in prayer. They stopped engaging with God and putting themselves in a position where God can speak. God can begin to work in their hearts. They said, as they lit this candle in a dark place, may Christ be our light in our faith as well. On the third Sunday, it was joy. As many people during those times, they experienced hardship. They experienced painful circumstances of people passing away too early or them not having enough food or resources for them. They wanted joy. May joy be returned into our living. And in the busyness of our lives, we can all attribute that mindset that yes, when everything is busy and we're just going through the motions, oftentimes joy is what seeps out of us. And that candle that was lit is Christ, may you be our light in the form of joy. And then the fourth, which today is the fourth Sunday of the month before Christmas, represented peace. In a world where everything is about relationships, and especially in our world today where relationships become a little bit strained because of virtual relationships, social media, and these kind of things that kind of dilute relationships to a level where it's not deep anymore. It's very superficial, and words can just simply be spread all across the internet and all these different opinions, and developing relationships that feel like we have a lot of friends, when in reality we feel like no one really knows us. In that kind of place, Christ, the candle that was lit in this kind of for this kind of Sunday was, may there be a sense of peace that's established between our relationship with God, and because of that, our relationship with our fellow brothers and sisters around us and in the world as well. See, during our darkest moments and ongoing struggles, the people of God were anticipating that Christ would be their peace on multiple levels, and especially in our relationships as we look towards why Christ came. Christmas is a hectic season that can sometimes bring out the worst of us. And ironically, during Christmas, we are surrounded by these beautiful decorations and Christmas lights and all this white and brightness that's around us that's supposed to represent the glory of humanity, or what the whole season is supposed to be. But in our hearts, as we're kind of surrounded by this superficial beauty, our hearts are strained by difficult relationships. Our hearts are strained by tasks that we have to complete, and we feel weighed down by whether it's guilt, whether it's strained relationships, whether it's just the stress that the season actually brings. You know, for me, as we were going into the season and I was preparing the sermon this past week, something happened as I recognized just the reality of just how dark this season can be, even when Christmas represents such a great season of lightness, of celebration, of unity, and all this kind of stuff. It all started where my wife and my daughter needed to do some shopping, and so I took them, and I said, I don't want to do shopping, I got some work to do. And so I went into a cafe to do some work, and as I was doing my work, I sat down, getting ready to really plug away at it. I found a corner that was right beside this garbage can, so no one would sit near me, and I could just focus in on my work. I sat down, and about 5 minutes after I sat down, this young girl came and sat. She looked like she was in her maybe early 20s. She came down, sat right beside me, and started talking on the phone the whole time, an hour and a half while I was there non-stop, really loud, and I could tell you her whole life story, because that's what she was sharing with her best friend that was on the other line, on the other side of the phone. And during the time, I'm writing and I'm trying to figure out my sermon, and some of my words become her conversation. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't do this. She's confusing me, and she just keeps going. She won't stop. She keeps going, and then finally she says, oh man, you know what? You're breaking up. I can't really hear you. So then she turns her body towards me, puts her phone on speakerphone, right, and begins to speak that way. And that was another 30 minutes of her speaking in my face. And then to add insult to injury, as I'm just, all this rage is coming up, and I'm just trying to settle it as I'm trying to write a good sermon. But I'm writing it out of a heart of anger and this incredulity of her rudeness and how she doesn't care about the people who are around her. And as I'm building up in this rage, what she does is finally she hangs up the phone, gets up, starts looking through her wallet, and she realizes she doesn't have enough money to buy a coffee that she wants or a hot chocolate that she wants at the second cup that I was at. And she looks at me and goes, hey, excuse me, do you have $5 so I can buy a coffee? And I looked at her and I was like, what? What are you talking about? I don't carry money. and I went back into my work, and she was, oh, okay, I just needed money for coffee, right? And I couldn't believe just the way that she did that, and because of this, there's this like anger that came into my heart. And as soon as I got in my car, my wife and my daughter joined me. I already have this like built up anger, and this rage is just building up. I feel like I couldn't get my work done. It's already a busy season as it is. We get home, the kids have their hockey practice, they're getting their stuff ready, and I still didn't finish some of my work. I get in the car, I'm trying to usher them out. They're not paying attention to me. They're like, Dad, I need this, I need this. And finally we get in the car, we get to that ice rink, and then as soon as we go out, my daughter realizes, Dad, I forgot my skates. I went, oh my goodness, and then rage just comes into me even more because there's not enough time for me to go back home, pick up her skates, and go back to the practice. And so I'm raging on my daughter and saying, how can you not bring your skates to your hockey practice? Like, where's your mind at? And I'm just going at her in that way. And finally I said, just get back in the car. Let's apologize to your coach. Let's get back in the car. And then and as we're driving, Eden wanted his skates sharpened. And so then we're going to a place to get our skates sharpened. But I get stuck behind this transport truck. And behind this transport, it's not moving at all. I'm like, what is this transport truck doing? And so I put on my left-hand signal, waiting for a gap in the cars that are coming the other place. Find the gap, I pull in, but the other guy that was behind me that didn't want me to go into the gap, he speeds up and begins to blare his horn. And so already I'm so upset, I'm uptight. And so I turn to this guy as he's passing me and he keeps honking, and I say sorry, right? Just to diffuse it, I say, I'm really sorry about that. And then I keep going, but then he's not done. Yeah, so then as I'm driving, he keeps going in the lane in front of me and starts pumping his brakes. And then that starts getting to me even more. And then finally we're at a stop sign, and I'm trying to go onto the right lane to make a right turn. Then he goes in, pumps his brakes again, opens his window, and gives me the finger. At this time, I'm so angry that I've decided I'm following him home. I don't care how far his home is, I'm gonna follow him home, I'm gonna beat him up. I'm just gonna beat him up in this driveway. It's gonna make the world a better place. It's gonna bring me a lot more peace. And so then, as I'm deciding all of this, and I'm thinking about the kind of punch moves or how I need to duck, as I'm thinking about how I'm gonna beat this guy up, it occurred to me, my kids are in the car. And because my kids are in the car, it's probably bad for them psychologically to see their pastor, dad, beat up another guy in front of his family home. So I decided, all right, forget it. And I pull in, but I'm still steaming mad. And I have this look on my face, no one touched me, as I bring Eden's skates into the place to get it sharpened. And during that whole time, I'm just fuming. And then I see this huge line to pay for the skates. I'm like, oh my goodness. And the people who are behind the counter, they're talking to each other without attending the cash. So people are waiting. I'm there, and I'm about to explode. And then finally, my daughter, she just comes right up to me during this whole time. And I'm just like up to here. And there's no more I can take. She finally just comes and she just puts her head on my shoulder as I'm waiting. And I'm just like, heaving angry, just waiting. And she can see this. And as she puts her head on my shoulder, she says, Dad, I did something bad, right? I'm really sorry for making you angry. And then as soon as she says that, my whole body just relaxes, it diffuses. She, prevented nuclear explosion in my life. And I turned to her, and the very first thing, I want to get angry at my daughter too, but because of those words, as it diffused me, because I wanted justice, I wanted some sort of revenge, I wanted some sort of thing to take on my rage, but her words of, apologizing and realizing that I'm getting all worked up because of this, and everything begins to snowball from there. That gentle kind of closeness to me and diffusing it, I realized what it did is it prevented me from raging and continually spreading my rage to other people, because as soon as I would meet other people, that's all they get from me is my anger, my impatience, and I give it to them, and then they'll give it to someone else, and instead of spreading it, it diffuses and it ends right there from an apology. So when I began to look at this, I begin to realize as I look in this passage is Jesus understands the way that our world works. Jesus understands the difficulty of relationships. His people of his day were going through the same thing. Imagine a day where you live in a city where you know, and you absolutely know, half the population that lives there absolutely hates you. And how would you feel that knowing that half the population there absolutely hates you and they're doing everything in their power to suck all the taxes and all the money from you because you are less than citizens to them? And then to know the city that's just a little bit north of you, in Samaria, there's a whole group of people there that absolutely hate you as well. Jesus was born in a time where Romans were insulting Jews all the time, Samaritans attacking Jews, Jews then fighting back, and then these different factions within the Jewish parties insulting and attacking one another. It is to this place that Jesus came. And as Jesus comes and he begins to look at all the anger that is being built up because of the political strife, because of tensions between relationships, because of things that happened 400 years ago between families and people intermarrying with other people, and all of this growing and snowballing and developing as part of their culture and their psyche. This is the time that Jesus comes and he shares this word. He says to the people around him, as people have this anger, people have this retribution, people have this lack of forgiveness for everyone who's around us, and this upsetness, and all they're praying for is, God, I want my day in court. I want you to exact revenge on all these people. In this climate, heavily strained climate, Jesus says this to them. You have heard, and it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be the subject of judgment. But I tell you, he says, anyone who is even angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of hell. You know, it's an amazing hyperbole that Jesus brings into our understanding of human relationships and what's going on. Because people were saying, hey, I'm a good Christian, and they believed that they were being good because they weren't seeking blood vengeance for someone else who attacked their family or someone else who caused the death of their family, and they're saying, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. They should get the same penalty that they enacted on me. And so what they're saying is, hey, we're keeping the 10 Commandments because we are not murdering back. They murdered our people, or even though it was an accident, it doesn't matter. We deserve to have our day. We deserve for those people to feel our pain. And with that kind of mindset, they were saying, hey, God must be so proud that we're not murdering, right? God must be so proud that we're not getting the revenge that we deserve. And by holding back from killing, these Jewish people, these followers of God, believed that they were doing what God was calling to do. And Jesus saying, no, you've heard it said, do not murder or do not exact revenge. But I tell you, the heart behind this law is, even if you are angry with your brother or your sister, any person who's around you in your community, you are guilty of the same judgment as the one who murders. You know, it's a very difficult word for us to receive, because how many of us get angry at things that we feel have no big importance, but they just rile us up so much, and we hold to our anger. And what God says, what Jesus says to us during that time, not comforting us, not saying good job for not murdering that person, but what Jesus says to us is, yes, do not murder, but you being angry is the same thing. You know, part of the tragedy of this and what public anger does to our homes, to our life, is we know what this does. We know how it spreads, how anger viciously spreads throughout all of our relationships. We'll have a guy at work, boss shouts at him. He goes back home and he gets angry and he shouts at his wife. The wife begins to get really angry and then shouts at her children. The children get so angry they shout at the dog. The dog gets so angry he chews up all the furniture. We know that it just continually spreads this way. And so how then, the Bible gives us, how can anger be diffused and prevented so that it ceases to inflict violence? And the violence that Jesus is talking about is not simply violence against another person of murder. He's saying violence also to our own soul. To kill our soul of our true humanity. See, here Jesus presents this new way and he says, I will make this way possible. So how does Jesus make it possible? How is it possible that Jesus can stop us from getting to the point of anger where it begins to want to do violence to others and it inflicts violence to ourselves? Well, what Jesus does is this. The whole gospel message that we see is when Jesus goes to the cross, he says, all the violence that is here and all the anger that is there, he says, I didn't just die for this abstract sin that prevents you from having fellowship with God. I've died for it all. And so every time we want to exact revenge on other people, and every time that we feel like justice needs to be done, and every time we want to hurl insults and hurtful words at other people, he says, direct it towards me. This is what I came for. I've come to absorb. I came to take in. I came to receive all of that so that I can take it. And then through my death, I let that to die with me. And allowing that to die with me, it doesn't spread to others. And as it dies with me, what I give in return, Jesus says, is I give the Spirit. A spirit of love, a spirit of power. For God did not give us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, of power, and of sound mind. What Christ gives to us through his death on the cross is a release, a diffusing of our anger, of our diffusing of our insistence of revenge, and replaces it with love, power, and sound mind. See, Jesus even goes on and he says this. He says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, then come offer your gift. You know, a lot of times we come to church and we think about worship in that kind of same way. We're like, yeah, you know what? I need to go to church today because I'm so angry or I'm so upset and God needs to make my heart right. And we come in this way and Jesus, he turns things around. And he says, that's not what worship is for. He says, when you're coming to worship or when you're coming to the altar and on your way, and what Jesus meant by saying on your way, remember, he was speaking to a lot of Galileans at that time, and then they were in Jerusalem. And so from going from Galilee to Jerusalem, when you're walking there, it took 3 days. So imagine a 3-day journey and you get to the altar finally, you finally get to Jerusalem and you're about to give your altar and there, your sacrifice, and there you remember that there's something wrong with a family member that you have a bad relationship with back home in Galilee. Jesus says this incredible and also almost incredulous teaching by saying, leave it there, go back 3 days, deal with that, and then walk back 3 days again, and then do your offering. You know, Jesus again here, he's using hyperbole because it's supposed to connote shock and into the people as they're hearing it. Are you serious? Like that whole trek all the way there, and we just leave our offering there, and then he wants us to go there. Because why? Jesus says, your reconciliation is the heart from which worship is made possible. Your reconciliation is the heart from which worship is made possible. Why is that? The only reason why worship is possible for us between God is because we were first reconciled back to God through Christ His Son. You know, God wants to be with us, and we see that whole gospel story and that narrative taking place where God is the one that leaves everything and begins to make a journey towards each and every one of us that we might be reconciled back to Him. We see this broken relationship between Adam and Eve, and then God and humans. And so God leaves heaven, goes into the garden in the cool of day, and begins to search out Adam and Eve. Where are you? We see in the same way where Abraham is called to sacrifice his son, but God says, no, I will take that burden and I will replace it with myself. And so on this mountain, He provides a lamb, and that's where we get the name. God will provide. He provides the means for the necessary sacrifice. We also see the covenant of the rainbow, where God, when He destroys the earth, He says, never again will I destroy. So how is that possible when everyone is destroying each other? He says, I will give my own life, and the rainbow will be the covenant promise that life is possible because of my sacrifice. You see, brothers and sisters, one of the hardest things for us to do when we are angry, when we are so upset with other people, is to be reconciled. And Jesus says, be reconciled and then present your worship. He says, come to me, receive from me, and then proceed to worship. See, the alternative to our anger and to our insistence for God to answer our prayer to have revenge on other people, the first thing that He tells us that we have to do is be reconciled. The second one comes a little bit later, where He says this, and settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may go to prison, and you will pay every last penny. See, what Jesus was saying, that in the course, in a place where you are demanding certain justice with an adversary that you have a disagreement with, He says, instead of making another enemy and proving your rightness over his or hers, He says, try to make amends. In fact, Jesus kind of refers back to this part of this Sermon on the Mount, where a little bit later in verse 38 to 48, Jesus talks about loving our enemies. You've heard it said, everyone loves their friends and they're close with their friends, but I tell you, love your enemy. And what Jesus is basically saying is, make friends. Can you even imagine that? Making friends with someone that did so much wrong to you? And Jesus says this is what people of light do. And the reason why people of light are able to do this is because they've already received that model and that power from me. I don't know about you guys, but I remember when I first moved into my house and the previous owners did so much wrong. We had to spend so much money to correct all the wrongs that they've done. And I was so upset that even my signing lawyer, my house real estate lawyer, said, you have to take them to court. This is ridiculous. We've never seen someone leave their house in this kind of condition and put it all on you. Take them to court. You will definitely win, right? And just save all your bills. You have all the pictures and all this kind of stuff, and they will be punished for what they've done. And so as we're preparing for this, I'm going to get my money back, and I can't believe they put us through this kind of stress, and they don't even understand, and they think, and I'm getting so upset. And as I'm putting things together, and I talk with some friends who are lawyers, goes, hey, what do you think you can help me with my preparation of the documents? They say, yeah, of course, no problem. And as I'm doing this, suddenly my wife and I, as we're talking, we feel like, is this the first thing that we want to do when God calls us to move into this new neighborhood? That the first thing that we pursue is a lawsuit against someone else. So as difficult as it was, my wife and I, we decided, you know what? Let's try. Let's try to be reconciled. And so, of course, my wife tells me to do it because she's so angry too. So I called up the owner and I said, let's meet at this place and let's try to reconcile. And that's what we did. Even though I was shafted so much in that meeting, still, there's reconciliation. Right? After that reconciliation, as I walked away, I didn't feel good. I didn't feel like, yo, everything's good, God's good, my life is good. I felt even more angry. But as that anger began to understand this gospel that Jesus is teaching us, it prevented a darkness of my soul getting darker. See, brothers and sisters, one of the reasons why Jesus gives us this Sermon on the Mount and talks about murder, because the outcome, even when you have your vengeance, even when you're able to exact revenge on another person, it doesn't result in peace. It doesn't result in peace. All it results in is superficial arrogance of your righteousness. You think you are right. You feel that you had your day and you proved the other one wrong, but it doesn't bring peace. It brings this self-entitled righteousness that continues, those walls begin to grow thicker and thicker, and you become more and more defined on whether someone crosses your boundaries and whether they are right or wrong. And you begin to pursue each and every one of these conflicts in your life so that you can always be in the right. Jesus knew that this would destroy our hearts. This is why he says, be reconciled. The first thing, be reconciled. The second thing he says, try to make friends with your enemies. See, Jesus not only takes our rage and our anger, but he offers an exchange for it. And this is the reconciliation part that Jesus offers us. He says, you know the outcome of the other way. The outcome of my way is you will receive peace in your heart. There's a peace that the world does not understand, a peace that the world does not know. This peace, Jesus says, I will give to you. Trust me, follow me. So brothers and sisters, during this Christmas season, I want us to learn how we can do this. It's to learn how do we forgive others as we have been forgiven. How do we extend peace to others even when we have been wronged? Jesus says, look to me, receive from me. And then as we do, we begin to experience a little bit more of God's peace to restore order to our hearts. Let's pray.